Hello bag builders, it's Diane from Spencer Ogg Sewing Patterns, and I am here to introduce you to my new sewing pattern, which is the Pixie Crossbody. It's a full written pattern with full colour photographs all the way through for every step, and it comes with a free video tutorial to walk you through making this gorgeous bag. Think you can't make a zip on the curve? Well, now you can, because we attach it on the straight and then we bend the fabric round. So it's a really easy zip insertion method, and the whole thing is suitable for domestic machines. So none of us are carrying much around at the moment, so I thought I'd design a bag specifically for today and today's environment. The bag has two open pockets to the front. The top pocket gives easy access to masks or to your phone, and the front pocket can be made in mesh to keep a mini bottle of hand sanitizer close at hand. To the back, there's a large zip pocket for valuables. Again, can be used for your phone, plenty of room there. I was originally going to call it the Sign of the Times bag, but after I'd made a few, I just realised it was too cute for that name, so it's now called the Pixie. So if you've got a phone bag and it's a bit too small, if you've got a crossbody and it's a bit too big, well, I think this is going to be the perfect happy medium for you. So like me, if you're just carrying a few essentials around when you go out, when you do actually go out, then this is the bag for you. It measures 21 by 15 centimetres, and that is 8 1/4 by 6 inches. So it sounds quite small, but it actually holds a surprising amount. Lots of room inside too. Plenty of room for your keys. A compact accordion wallet. A Kindle, spectacles. It'll even fit an A5 notebook in there. In the back, inside, there's a divided pocket which will also fit your phone or your glasses, and there's a pen slot as well. Or you can just leave it as one big open pocket. It comes with instructions to make a full length crossbody strap, and also directions how to make a detachable strap or use your own boat strap if you prefer. It's a compact crossbody that is suitable for both men and women, so you can make it in fabrics to suit anyone. This is one I made for my husband. He specifically asked me for one in vinyl he didn't want the slip pockets on the back, he just wanted the zip pocket on the front. So in vinyl, but he wanted it without the straps, just so he could hold it as a manly man bag. But I think it works quite well actually. Whether it has the straps or not, it's great for a man. So it's suitable for lots of different fabrics. Initially I developed it just for quilting cottons and canvas, but then I realised it's really great in cork. Full cork version there. It also works brilliantly in vinyl, denim, even waxed canvas would be ideal. I'll also show you how to make these really cute pixie zip pullers. It's a moderate skill level pattern, and it comes with a full video tutorial for those of us who are more visual learners. I also have a bag making board for general help and support with all my patterns, and I'm there daily to ask any questions, so please do join up for that at any point. I'll put the link in below. I'd love to see your makes. Just use the hashtag SpencerOgg on Instagram, or post your pictures to my Facebook board. Find lots more of my patterns and hardware at spencerogg.com. I'll put the link in below. And of course, While you're here, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's lots and lots of bag making help and tips, lots of free projects, and of course all my bag making tutorials. So what are you waiting for? Download the Pixie Crossbody now and go sew! Fabrics suitable for the project outer, anything from cotton quilting weights, canvas, denim, home deck weights, through to cork. I've used versions of cork and quilt weight cottons. I've made it in vinyl. I've even made a sample in Cordura there, which is great for a travel bag. So really wide ranging. The only thing I'd stay away from is something like a really bulky fabric like a tweed, because you have got some quite tight corners in here. It's better to have a thinner, more compact fabric. But otherwise, go for it. So once you've decided on your outer fabric, then you can take a look at what you're using for the rest of your components. So for lining, just use a quilt weight cotton. For your interfacing, I've used a medium weight fusible interfacing all the way through, so that can be woven or non-woven. So something like a Violin F220, a G700 or a Pellon SF101, perfectly good. Don't use fleece, fusible fleece or foam for this project. They're just too bulky. You've got some small corners here, so nothing bulky. If you're using cork or vinyl, then you don't need to interface those pieces at all. They're perfectly sturdy enough on their own. Just as a tip, if you were using quilting cottons for the outer and you did want it a lot firmer or a good bit firmer than with the cotton woven interfacing, then you can use Decaville Light as well. You'll also need 2 zips, a 16-inch and a 9-inch. So you can cut those to size. They're going to be longer than the bag itself. We're going to be cutting them down. So whether it's a fixed size or it's a continuous zip, those sizes are fine. What it does need to be is 1 1/4 inches wide. So just double check the measurement. That is the standard measurement of a number 5 bag zip. So it does need to be a number 5 bag zip. A number 3 zip is going to be too narrow for this project because it's going to dictate the width of the arms of this bag, and I'll show you a little more detail on that later, but just check that you've got a 1 1/4 inch width zip. You're going to need 2 3/4 inch rectangle rings and 1 3/4 inch slider for your strap. You can of course use a pre-bought strap if you prefer. You need some all-purpose thread to match. And if you want to make the mesh pocket for this bag, because the mesh pocket is really good for accepting a small bottle of hand sanitizer, makes it much stretchier. So just a small piece of mesh. I've used by Annie's mesh and a 5-inch piece of fold over elastic for the top of that. You can add your own logo badges, of course. I've used a little logo tab inside on the lining, and you can use a handmade bag or your branding badge on the outside if you wish, and optional rivets for the strap at the end if you want to, and also for the little zip pullers. Just a few tips on cutting before we start. If you're using cork or vinyl, you don't need to interface those pieces. Anything else, we're using medium weight fusible interfacing, so you can block fuse everything, so you only need to cut out once. The strap, I've actually had to cut in a couple of different lengths because my piece of fabric wasn't long enough, and that's fine. I'll show you how to join those later on in the pattern. Accurate cutting is key for this. Be careful to cut exactly along the lines of the pattern pieces. It's quite a small pattern, so it's important to be accurate. When you're cutting main body piece A, we're cutting it on the fold. Ensure the bottom of the pattern piece is directly on the fold. If you allow a little extra or a little less, your bottom gusset and sides are going to be too large or too small, so it is important. Also, don't snip into the corners when you're cutting out this main piece A. It's quite important, and rotary cutters are going to do that, so I would avoid cutting with a rotary cutter on this one. You don't want any snips into these little corners here, so cut accurately that corner. If you have a snip in it, it's going to confuse you right at the end when we stitch the sides together. Onto the bottle pocket. You've got a couple of options on the bottle pocket. So if you're using mesh for the bottle pocket, you just cut in one piece with the pattern piece the right way up. If you want to use fabric for the bottle pocket, then you need two pieces, one in outer with the pattern piece the right way up and one in lining with the pattern piece the wrong way up, and that's described in the instructions. I have interfaced the outer and I haven't interfaced the lining. A couple of tips for the pattern in general is it's a 1 centimetre seam allowance or a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way through unless otherwise stated, and backstitch at the beginning and end of every seam whether I tell you to or not. So if you cut out like I am, let's get started. So let's make our lining. First of all, I'm going to take piece J, which is my lining slip pocket. I'm going to fold it in half with the right sides together across the width. I'll line up all my edges, clip that in place. And then I'm going to stitch across the top with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So on my machine now I've just got a size 14 needle. When I'm stitching cork afterwards, or the same for vinyl, I'd change that out to a microtex needle. So for my lining, size 14 needle, I've just got a stitch length of about 2.8 and I'm just going to go across that top edge of the seam allowance. Yeah, backstitch beginning and end, regardless of whether I remember to tell you or not. Now all the way through the pattern I'm going to snip my ends of threads at every opportunity. You'll see me swiping threads off the table all the time. Don't worry, I don't have little pixies underneath there, I have a bin. So it all goes in there and keep it tidy. So that's stitched, let's just turn it through. I'm going to take that to the ironing board and press that flat. So that seam's nice and flat along the bottom, and I've got a nice folded edge along the top. Now, when you're deciding which is the front and which is the back of your pocket, obviously it doesn't matter on this one because it's plain, but if you've got a directional print, make sure the front is the one where the print is looking the right direction to you. I'll go and press that now. So that's nicely pressed. I'm going to choose my top edge and I'm going to top stitch along there. Now anything like this, just as a tip going forward, if your fabric's really thick, there probably aren't in this lining fabric, but if you're doing something in the future where you find your fabrics are really thick and you want to reduce bulk, you can open that seam allowance and you can shuffle the seam a little bit towards the back. So it gets rid of the bulk along the bottom if you're going to be stitching that along something later on. And your seam will be hidden within your pocket anyway. But in this case, we're absolutely fine. So I'm just going to stitch along that top edge about 3 mil or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Trim. So I'm going to add a second row of stitches just to give a twin needled effect, and I'm going to put my logo badge in the middle of there too, so I can actually catch it in when I'm sewing along. I'll just find the midpoint of those by just folding in half and just roughly place that. There. So I've just caught my logo tag in the top there. Trim up as usual. So we are leaving the sides open at the moment. It's just that top edge and the bottom edge that are caught. If you struggle with top stitching in a straight line, there's always your trusty blind hemming foot, which I'm always showing you, I know. Just put that on your machine, put it to the edge of the fabric, and move your needle onto the fabric. Just adjust the position of the needle and that'll give you a perfect straight top stitch. So now I'm going to attach my pocket to the lining. So grab your lining pieces B, and we just want one of these for the time being. Now you'll notice that these have for sticky out bits. Yes, that's a technical term. And there's two shorter ones and two longer ones. And the shorter ones will form the top edge of your bag, and the longer ones will form the bottom edge of your bag. And for the sake of giving them names, I'm going to call these arms to the top and legs to the bottom. So your short ones are the arms and your bottom ones are the legs, just to remind you which way around it goes. Obviously the arms are to the top. And I'm going to grab my finished lining pocket piece. I'm going to lay that on top. So both pieces are face up. I'm going to grab a ruler and I'm going to position that 7 centimetres or 2 3/4 inches down. Make sure that's nice and straight. And clip it in place. And now I'm going to top stitch around all 3 sides. So I'm just going to leave the top edge open. And I'm going to top stitch or edge stitch down the side, along the bottom and up the other side. So about 3 mil or 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. So you won't see those lines of stitching on the side when the bag's complete, but you will see the bottom edge. Those will actually go into the seams of the side seams. Seams of the side seams. You know what I mean. Now on that bottom edge, you can add an extra row of stitching too, to give it that twin needle effect again. So about 1 centimetre away or 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. Gives it extra strength too. There we go. Trim up. Now you can divide this pocket if you want to. So it's fine as it is, just one big pocket, but you can also divide it up if you choose to, and I'm going to do that about 1/3 of the way across, because then it seems to work well for a phone in one side and a couple of pens in the other. So just draw a line on there. So I'll just stitch along that line too. Blow my chalk away. And that's divided your pocket. Obviously you can divide that any way you want to. You can divide it in halves or not divide it at all. But that just seems to work well for a phone and a pen. Now, believe it or not, that is your lining complete. That's all there is to it. So we can put that to one side for now. Let's make a start on the outer. Damn camera, I am having a bit of problem with the autofocus on this thing at the moment. It keeps going in and out of focus, so I apologise if you're getting a tiny bit of blur in here and there. I am trying to sort it out. If I can't sort it out in this video, I will have a new camera by next one. So many apologies. So let's move on to the front pockets on the outer of our bag. So you have a choice here, as we discussed before. You can either make it in mesh or you can make it in fabric. I will make it in fabric today, just because it ties in nicely with the bag, but I'll show you how to make the mesh pocket first. So on the mesh, we're going to be using our small piece of fold over elastic. I'm going to switch my machine, or I've already switched my machine, to a narrow zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch. If your machine has one, it might have a particular stretch stitch. And we need the stitches to have a little bit of stretch here so they don't pop or break when the elastic or the fabric are stretched to accept the bottle. So try a little bit on a scrap first, just so you know it works all right. So I'm going to grab my elastic and I'm going to lay it face down. And I'm going to lay the slanted edge of the mesh along the lower half of the binding and baste it in place. So just make sure you've got it the right way around. So that slanted edge is going to go along the bottom half of that elastic. So you can see there's a line along the centre of the elastic. We want it to be just below that. So I'm going to clip that in place. And with my stretch stitch, I'm just going to baste that on the lower half of the elastic. Be careful not to stretch elastic as you sew, and something like a stiletto can help you to push it along if you need to. Keep your zigzag very narrow so that it's not passing over the central part of the elastic. And then I'm just going to fold that down over the top and clip that in place. A little bit fiddly. So I'm folding along that line of the elastic. So make sure you're covering that first half. Make sure it's sitting correctly before you sew with all your clips, and then we can just zigzag over the top of that. There we go. So I'll just snip the ends off that so we're all in line. And there's your pocket ready to go. Now I'm going to use the fabric pocket today. So grab your outer and your lining piece, and they're cut facing opposite each other, so all we need to do there is place them with right sides facing. You can, by the way, add a line of piping in there if you wish. It's nice and simple. Just add your piping in, tack it in with the piping cord facing inwards, tack it on the top and then flip them over. So right sides facing, and I'll clip in place along that top slanted edge. And we're just going to stitch along the slant edge 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from the top edge. I'll switch my machine back to a running stitch. At the moment it's still on zigzag. Okay, and I'm going to trim those corners just to reduce a little bulk in the seam allowance. And then fold back so your lining is lying behind, so you're now wrong sides together, and I'll just go and press that so it's nice and flat. So there we are, nice and pressed. I'm now going to top stitch along that slanted edge, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and I'm going to top stitch along the bottom as well. Although that's a raw edge, it's just to hold that securely in place along the bottom, and that will be disguised within your seams later, but just to hold it in place. So let's do the slanted edge first. Stitch along the bottom to secure it. And then again, you can do a second line of stitching along this top slanted edge if you want to. So I'll do another one along the top, just about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from the very top edge. So that is our bottle pocket finished in fabric, and that's ready to apply to the other pocket on the front. Really pretty. Let's grab the other pieces. So I'm using the fabric pocket, but it's the same whether you use the fabric or the mesh pocket, just the same directions. So grab pieces D, E and F. I'm going to start with E. You can see they're angled. E's the centre one, D to one side, F to the other. So let's start work on E. So with right sides up, you've got your higher slanted edge towards the right. Grab your completed pocket and lay it face up at the bottom. So we'll line up the bottom and the side edges, and I'm going to clip that in place. So I'm going to stitch within the seam allowance around the 3 sides of that pocket just to hold it in place for the moment. If you're making the mesh pocket and you still have elastic hanging off the sides, trim it now. You'd want it to the same length as your pocket. And then we're going to grab piece D, which is the shorter one, of the pockets sides, and we're going to lay that face down on top, lining up the bottom and the long edge here. which is the left edge. Clip that in place, and then we'll stitch along just this outer long edge with the 1 centimetre seam allowance. Trimmity trim trim. You know me with trimming. So that's one side of the pocket attached. Now I'm going to grab piece F and lay that on top, face down, and we're now laying that on the right hand side, so that long right hand edge should match up. So match it up with the bottom, and this right long hand edge, clip in place. And now I'm going to stitch along that edge, that long edge, with 1 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, so now fold back your 2 side panels and you'll see that your pocket, the front of it, is complete. So I'm going to take that to the ironing board and I'm going to press that nice and open with the seams facing outwards towards the sides. So there we are, beautifully pressed. If you did want to add a logo badge, by the way, you can add one to the central part of this higher portion of the pocket here on the panel rather than the pocket itself. It doesn't work on the pocket because that pocket needs to stretch and bend in use, so you don't really want a rigid badge on there. So I'd put it centrally on this higher portion if you're going to add one. I'm not going to add one today because I don't think that really matches. I'd like a pink one, but I don't have one. So I'm now going to top stitch along these 2 panels, and that will hold the seam allowances back on the back and give it a nice decorative effect. So just 3mm or 1/8 of an inch onto the side panels. That's one side, and then the other side. So there we are, top stitched on both sides. So keeping that pocket panel with the right sides uppermost, we're going to grab our lining for this pocket. So that's your piece H. So I'm going to leave that right side uppermost, and then I'm going to lay the pocket piece right side down on top. And I'm going to clip that at top and bottom edge, lining it up. So I'm going to stitch this, and I'm going to stitch it with a 1 centimetre, can't say it, a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance at top and bottom. There we go. If you have got any bits overhanging, you can just snip those off, or you can trim the seam allowances before you do those seams. But we should be fine on this. Trim off any loose threads. You know I hate a loose thread. Okay, so now I'm going to turn that through and I'm going to press. Now just a little idea here for you. Obviously you can just press it straight flat with, oh, I've got a loose thread. You can just press that flat so your seams are exactly at top and bottom, so you don't see a lining at all. But if you've got quite a nice lining and you want to see a little edge of it, you can just roll it up a little bit at the bottom, so you just get a peek of the lining showing at the top, and you can have any amount you want really. But it gives the idea of piping without actually having to go to the whole effort of piping. So I'm going to press mine like that, so you just get a little edge of the lining showing on top. So there's our pocket pressed, and we've got the appearance of piping at the top without all the effort. So that's just folded, rolled it slightly up at the back there. So now I'm going to top stitch along that top edge onto the main body fabric, just 3mm or 1/8 of an inch along there. So you could add a second line of top stitching again, give it that twin needle look. Quite like it with just one on that one. And next we're going to get the big guns out and get our main body piece on the go. So open your main body piece out flat. Now we have to remember with this that the top, or the short edges at top and bottom, they're going to end up as the top of our bag, and these legs in the centre are going to end up as the bottom of our bag. So taking one side of this, the top is facing this way, so with the pocket, with the open edge towards the top, that's your piped edge, just line it up along the legs, the top of the legs at the bottom. I hope that makes sense. And clip that in place. So that's just on the single layer, opening towards the top edge, and now I'm going to stitch along the bottom to hold that in place with my top stitching 3mm or 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and then I'll sew along the sides within the seam allowance just to hold it in place. So we're stitched on there. Now you can go back and do a second line of stitching along the bottom to give that twin needle effect. I do like that because it gives extra strength as well as the appearance, so I am going to do that. So there we go, a second line of stitching along the bottom there. 2. So that's your front slip pocket and bottle pocket finished. So let's move on to the zip pocket on the back. I'll put this body piece to one side for the moment. So grab your pocket piece C, which is your outer back zip pocket, and your 9-inch zip. Now the reason I use a longer zip than the pocket itself is just to make it easy for application, because we can actually have the zip puller off to one side when we're stitching it on there. We don't have to start and stop the machine. It also means you've always got exactly the right length of zip without any faffing about, shall we say. So let's get started with that. Lay your pocket piece out flat. You've cut that double, it was cut on the fold, and lay it so it's right side up. So if you've got a directional print, make sure it's looking in the right direction to you. This is going to be the front and what you see on the bag. So I'm going to use it that way. I'm going to take my zip, I'm going to lay it face down on top with the puller to the right when the zip's closed. So centre it along there. I mean, as long as you've got enough, a little tag on that side, and as long as you've got enough on that side to keep your puller out of the way, then that's fine. I'm going to clip that in place. You can use a number 3 zip on this back pocket rather than number 5. I like to keep the look constant, so I'm using number 5. You do need the 5 on the top edge, but you can get away with a number 3 on the bottom of the pocket here if you want to. Just make sure they all tie in nicely if you're using 2 different zips. And then I'm going to lift the bottom edge and I'm going to lay that directly on top and line it up with that top zip edge again. So I've made a sandwich with my zips in the middle. Fabric is my bread and butter. How true is that? Clip that in place. Just make sure it's nice and neat, make sure that your sides are lining up exactly. And then I'm going to stitch along that top zip edge with a 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I'll need to change to a zipper foot on my machine. And then I'll stitch across there. Don't forget to back stitch. So you've just fully attached that zip. How easy was that? So I'm going to turn that through and then I'm going to press it. Obviously you can zigzag the ends of each side of the zip before you start, because we all have the propensity to pull the zip puller off the side, don't we, I'm afraid. So I'll press that in place. So that's my pocket neatly pressed. Now I'm going to top stitch along that top edge onto the fabric, just 3mm or 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. I'm keeping my zipper foot on there because that allows me to get close to the zip still. I've just put one line of stitching on there. You can add 2 if you wish. And now we're ready to attach that to our body. So grab your main body panel A again, lay it out flat. Now this time, we're going to have it the other way up. So we've got the back towards us. That's the front of the bag, the pocket on, with the slip pocket on. We're now going to add the zip pocket to the back. And I'm going to draw a line on there, 6.5 centimetres or 2.5 inches down from the top edge. Down from this short arm at the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. Make sure it's nice and straight. Use a quilter's rule. So just use that in the chalk. Hopefully you can see that. And then I'm going to flip my pocket so I can see the back of the zip. So the puller's on the other side, and I'm going to line that up on top. So I want to line up the edges of the sides with the edges of the pocket, but the pocket's sitting above, upside down. And I'm going to lay that free zip edge along that line I've just drawn. Now it's really difficult to obviously get clips into there. I am going to use some pins because you can't see these pins. These are going to be within the seam allowance. So I know, although I'm using cork, if it's fabric it's fine, but cork can leave little holes. But this is going to be within the seam allowance and you won't see it. So I'm going to use a couple of pins. Don't use double-sided tape because when you flip the pocket back down, which is what we're going to do, you'll see the tape sticking out at the top. So I'll just add a couple of pins. So just before we stitch across there, just flip your pocket down to make sure you're landing in the right position and you've got it lined up. So make sure it's falling so the sides are nicely lined up and your pocket is finishing on or just above the legs of the body. So that looks fine. I'm going to take that to the machine. I'm going to stitch across there with my 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's in. Trim up. Flip your pocket down so it's the right way, and we're just going to clip that to the sides now. So before you do anything, open your zip halfway. We don't want to be sewing up the side with a zip puller off the side because you'll never be able to open it again. And just put a pin in or clip that down at the side so you catch it so the zip is falling flat. So I'm now going to stitch all the way around the 3 sides with a top stitch 3mm or 1/8 inch away from the edge. You won't see the side stitching, you'll only see that bottom one, so just make sure that's nice and tidy. And I'll swap my zipper foot off again for a regular foot or a walking foot, whichever you prefer to use. We'll stitch the sides. Sometimes it's worth stitching the bottom first just to make sure it's secure in place if you're worried about it shifting a little bit. So yeah, that's that zip and your pocket finished. So just trim off the excess zip tape. And that's your outer pockets done. So now I think it's definitely time for a tea break. Tea break over. Right, time to apply the zip to our main body. So just to explain why we're using a 1 1/4 inch width zip and why that's so important. If you look at a finished bag, the width of the zip will make a big difference to the width of the finished arm or the finished side panel. So if you use a number 3 zip or a much narrower width zip, that'll actually narrow the width of the arm and it won't match with the leg when you come to join the two, and you do need that width in there. So it is important to have that 1 1/4 inch width of zip and to stick with the seam allowances that we're suggesting. So grab your main body panel. We've completed all our pockets. Swivel it around so you have your slip pocket, your front pocket to the top, and grab your zip. So again, the zip, I've suggested a 16 inch, but basically it just needs to be longer so that you can have a tab at each end. There's room at both ends so you can keep the zip puller off to one side. It makes things so much easier for attaching a zip. So full body panel flat, the right side uppermost. And we're going to take our 16 inch zip and we're going to lay it face down along the top arm. So you've got plenty of zip tape to both sides. Predominantly plenty to keep that zip puller on at that end, and I'm going to clip that in place. Now I carry a bag on my right hip. If you carry it on your left hip, or if you're left-handed, you may prefer to have the zip opening the other way around, in which case just put your zip puller to the other side, and that works for any bag. So I'm going to stitch across there with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've put my zipper foot back on the machine and I'm going to stitch all across the top of there, edge to edge, with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way to the end of the arms on both sides. So I'm going to stitch from this side so I can see the zip tape itself, but you're stitching from the end of the arm to the end of the arm right away. Now while you're stitching, make sure that zip does not slip downwards, because if it slips downwards and away, that's also going to shorten the width of those arms or reduce the width of those arms. So it's important to stay aligned along that top edge. A stiletto often helps here as well. So there we are, stitched edge to edge along there. So you can stop when you get to the end of the arm and back stitch. So still with your zip on the top, you're looking at the back of the zip, grab your first lining piece B, and we want the one that doesn't have the pocket on for this first operation, because that will be the front of the bag. So with the arms at the top, and it's the arms, the shorter arms that we want to attach to the zip edge, flip that over so the right side's facing and line up the top edge. So we're lining up that edge, and we also want to line up the arms, the end of the arms on the body with the end of the arms on the lining. So clip that in place. Now just to say, that first line of stitching, you do need to do that. That's not just a basting stitch, because this line of stitching we're not going to stitch right to the end. So that is important, you do that line of stitching first. Now flip the whole panel over, so you're looking at the reverse. So this is the back of my cork you're looking at now. Now take a look at your stitch line across there. Now we're going to follow along that stitch line you just made exactly, but we're going to start and stop an inch or 2.5 centimetres from each end. And that's important because we need to keep the lining separate. So do draw a line before you start, because if you're anything like me, you will completely forget and just carry on. So that's where I'm going to start and finish. So what you're in effect doing is then attaching the lining, but the lining will still be free on the ends. So I'm going to whiz across the top of there, exactly across that same stitch line, beginning and ending on those lines. So you can see on that side it's stitched all the way to the end, but on the lining side we've stopped just before. So that little piece of lining is free there. So now we can top stitch that top edge. So flip that around, the lining is facing towards you, zip facing towards you. So have your zip underneath the lining there. I'm going to press it so that the zip, the lining and the lining seam allowance are facing that way, and your body seam allowance and your zip seam allowance are facing that way. Let's see. So what we're going to be doing is just top stitching on the outer. We don't want to catch the lining or the lining seam allowance into there. So press that open. So I've pressed that open. You can see that my lining seam allowance is going away from my body seam allowance and my zip seam allowance. So I'm going to take this to machine now, and I'm going to top stitch along the body, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge, catching in the seam allowance of the body and the zip, and not catching any of that seam allowance of the lining in. Keep checking underneath to make sure. There we go, so that's top stitched but just through the body. See, my lining is still separate and my lining seam allowance is still separate. So I'll just flip that down, and I will clip the lining to the body just to keep it out of the way for now while we do the other side of the zip. Now you've stitched, but that, by the way, it's worth giving that a press to make sure that lining is staying downwards as well. Now let's move on to the other side of the zip. So flip your outer body piece right side up with the zip towards the top, and take the free edge from the bottom and fold it up to lie directly on top of the free edge of the zip, lining up the sides of the arms, sides of the body and the top of the zip tape. Clip that in place. So exactly as we did with the other side, we're going to stitch all the way along there with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'll flip it to the side so I can see the zip tape, and I'm going to stitch along there from the end of the arm to the end of the arm all the way along. There we go, so that's stitched all the way from one edge to the other. Needs a bit of trimming up in my book. And again, just as we did with the other side, I'm going to turn it so the lining is on facing up. Grab your second lining piece. So this time it's the one with the pocket, and I'm going to lay that with the shorter arms towards the top, lying directly on top of that zip edge we just stitched, and clip that in place. Make sure your arms line up at the ends. Yep, nice and flat. So flip that over again, because we want to stitch from this side, same as before, because we want to follow that exact line of stitching again. Draw my marks at 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch in. And then I'm going to stitch all the way along there from that 1 inch line to that 1 inch line, directly on top of the existing stitch line. And there we go. So when you flip it over, you've left those lining edges open again. So we want to top stitch that again. So just a little bit fiddlier this side, because of course you've got a sealed unit at the bottom now. But slip a tailor's ham or something similar, a rolled up towel, into the body there, and then do the same thing. So we want the zip falling towards the lining and the lining seam allowance falling away, and press your body seam allowance and your zip seam allowance away towards the body, and then we're going to top stitch to the side. So I'll just go and press that open. So I've pressed that open, and you're going to say, well, how the heck am I going to top stitch that now? But there's another good reason for leaving a long zip tail. Open your zip as far as possible without losing your puller off the end. Turn it through. Keep your hand on that zip puller, don't let it come off. So there you go, you can get at it now. So make sure that you are going to catch in your body seam allowance and zip, and the lining and lining seam allowance are facing away in the opposite direction, so you're not catching those in. So just check as you go. So a top stitch on that side as well. So just fold that lining back down, and you can give that a press as well, just to make sure it's lining, or it's falling nicely inside, and zip that zip halfway. That's important. We don't want to have it on the ends when we stitch up the side seams and not be able to open the zip again. So halfway for that. I'll just go and press that lining down inside. So you're doing brilliantly here. I've got to say, you're probably more than halfway done now. We're on the home straight, so you know, if you need an extra piece of chocolate here, please do grab one. We're going to move on to making the strap carriers. So it'll depend on which fabric you use. If you choose fabric or vinyl, we'll use one method. If you use cork, we'll use another method. So if you're using fabric or vinyl, all you need to do is take your piece L, fold it centrally along the length just to get a line, or you could draw a line along the centre, and fold the sides in to meet that centre crease. And then going to top stitch along both edges close to the edge. Once I've done that, I'll snip that in half to form two. Thread on my rectangle ring, and just tack it closed at the bottom here, just to hold it in place. So if you're using cork, that's a different method. So I'll show you how to do that today, because I'm sure you're used to the fabric method. You can either just fold it directly in half and clip it on the edges, or you can use a little bit of glue, which I'll do today. You don't need to use glue. I just find you seem to be able to slide it a little bit easier, so that the edges match up so much nicer. So a little bit. I'm using Fabri-Tac permanent adhesive here, which you can buy in most countries, I think. Fold it in half along the length and clip it in place. So with the glue you can just kind of slide it a little bit still, so it's still tacky. You get a really nice edge on it. And then I'm going to stitch down each of the long edges, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And of course my bobbin thread has run out. I'll just do that again. No, of course I wouldn't do anything that unprofessional. Right, so bobbin thread in. I'm now going to stitch along there, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge, both sides. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to clip that in half now. Thread on my rectangle ring. I'm just going to stitch it at the end. Baste it within the seam allowance to secure it in place. I'll repeat that with the other one. Okay, so whether you're using fabric or you're using cork or vinyl, pick up all methods from here. So if you want to, we can stitch a line close up to the ring itself, so that'll help stop it falling down in use. I mean, it's optional, but it is a nice touch. So there's two ways to do it. You can either put your zipper foot back on the machine, which will enable you to sew really close to there. Obviously your normal machine foot is too wide to get in close to that metal work. The other option is to use a hump jumper. So you can follow my hump jumper video. I'll put a link in below. But if you lay your hump jumper on at the other side, you can get a regular foot to pass over the top, and then you're raising the level on the other side of it. So your foot's sort of on both sides, resting on both sides, but your needle is going down the centre. Obviously being careful to avoid hitting your metal work. So I'll just use a zipper foot today. So just slip it under there and you can get really nice and close up. Trim up, repeat with the other side. So we're ready to attach those to our bag. So let's pick up our main body piece again. And I'm going to lie that, so it's inside out, so the line is on the outside. I'll lie it flat so the zip is on the top. So it's kind of in a circle, you know, you can get your hand in the middle. It's a roll. So there's my zip, I'm seeing the back of the zip, and I want to hold these bits of lining that are loose out of the way, because when I attach my strap carriers, I don't want them attaching to the lining. So I'm just going to clip those back so they're well out of the way for when I attach my carriers, top and bottom, or both sides, however you want to call it. Okay, and then turn the whole thing over, just so you can see your zip the right way. So you can hold these out of the way. These are your legs, so just clip them out of the way for the moment, just so you can keep your eye on these. So we're working on the right side of the zip. So we're just working on the outer layer. We've clipped those lining pieces back out of the way that you left loose. And I'm going to take my first strap carrier and lie it on top, directly matching with the end, straight over the zip, centering it on there. And you can either clip that in place, or you can use a little bit of double-sided tape, whichever is easier. Make sure it's falling in line with the zip itself. And we'll do the same on the other end. Grab my other carrier. Yeah, so on the other side, I have actually just stitched over the end to keep that together. It just makes things a little simpler. So take my other one and lay it on top. Centrally, I'm going to clip that in place. You could actually have trimmed off the edge of your zip at this point. It would make it easier for clipping, but for some reason, I'm always, I don't know, I like to hang on to it to the very end. So that's clipped in place, both sides, so right on the very edge, matching up the edge of the arms, and now I'm going to stitch over there within the seam allowance on both sides. I've gone over that a couple of times just for security. There we go, that's those done. Take that clip off to release your arms again. We're going to leave those clips on the reverse, just holding back the lining, because we'll need those later. So next we're going to join our lining pieces at the bottom. So if you do have some clips in there from previously, just take those off. I had the lining fixed back against the body just to keep it out of the way. But just drop your lining pieces lower than your body piece. So your lining is hanging down there to the bottom and your body is to the top. And I want to seal or close that bottom lining edge. So I'm going to clip along the bottom there, just matching up the long straight edge. And now I want to sew along that whole edge with 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but leaving a turning gap. So I am going to draw a little line just to remind myself to stop there. So about 6 inches. 15 centimetres, but basically just inside the corners there. You just want to be on the main body. So let's stitch that up. Leave my gap. So there's my seam at the bottom, and I've left my turning gap. So I'm going to go to the Annie board and I'm going to press those seams open. So all the way along on both sides. So there we are, I've just pressed that open. The reason I'm doing that is because at the end when we turn it through, it makes it so much easier to match the edges when we're closing the gap at the end. So now we're going to start joining the sides of the outer together. And this is where it gets really exciting. This is where it starts to look like a real bag. So with it in this position, so you've got your lining and your outer completely separate, so it's outer and outer, lining and lining. We're going to grab the arm and the leg of the outer on one side and bring them together. So make sure your lining still clips back in there. We don't want to catch the lining in. We're bringing those two together and I'm going to clip them along that short edge, matching that line. Okay, now if I turn that over so you can see it from the zip side, let's just pull that lining out of the way. So I'll drop that there. So you can see the outer is sat on top of outer. The lining is completely out of the way. That's my lining sat in the middle. So we don't want to be attaching that at all. Let's just fold that down. So you see, it's just the short arms of the outer on both sides. And I'm going to stitch across there with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, or 3/8 of an inch. If you are a tiny bit out, don't worry if it's just a fraction. It's just you've used a slightly different seam allowance on the zip, or your zips are slightly different width. But that won't matter. You've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance either side, so don't fret too much if you're just a millimetre or so out. So stitch across there. I'm going to go back over it again just for strength. That's all going to be inside, so don't worry. You see? And then I'm going to do the same to the other side. So turn it round and you have your outer short edge of the arm and the outer short edge of the leg. And we're going to match those up and clip them together. Okay, there we are. I'm going to stitch across there again with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trim up, I've got a lot of threads there. There we go, so that's both outers matched, excluding the lining. So let's remove those clips that you had holding the lining back, first of all. And now we're going to join lining to lining. So the easiest thing is to flip it over and just pull back the outer a little bit. Flip out those legs that are lying underneath of the lining, and holding the outer back, I'm going to place this short edge of the lining arms along that short edge of the lining legs. So just pull it up. Just wiggle it around so you can see it better here. Try and get it in line. And then we're going to clip those together. And you could put a clip on this. It wouldn't do any harm, would it, to put a clip on there to hold it back. So you can see there is a channel, that zip channel is still in there in the lining, and those edges are folded back, those raw edges, that's how you want it. We're going to stitch that down now and keep those folded open. So we're going to sew across there with our 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance again. It's easier to do it from this side so you can see what you're doing. You can see that's stitched now, just across there. Our outer is held firmly back out of the way. So that's your first line inside seam attached. You do have a bit of a choice here, because if you look inside, you'll see this little gap here. Now that is not attached to the zip at the bottom, and you've got a couple of choices. So this is inside in the lining, and we want to attach that to the bottom just so it's very secure. You can leave it and nobody would ever notice, so you do have that option, or you can even put a couple of stitches in it by hand at the end, but personally I hate hand stitching, so I'm just going to secure the two pieces together now. So I'm going to secure lining to outer just across this zip edge, just so I don't have to do anything at the end, because I'm lazy and I don't like hand stitching. So lay arm and leg of your lining flat on top of your arm and leg of your outer, and just clip them in place together so everything's on top of each other now. The whole thing. And just put a couple of stitches, 2 or 3 stitches across that centre part, just across where the zip teeth are, and that will fix your lining at the bottom to the outer. We can't go right to the edge because we need the outer and lining separate later on to join the box corners. So just literally a couple of stitches across that centre point there. If you do it from the back, you can actually see the zip better, so I'm going to do it that way. So literally a couple of stitches there. Let me open that again so you can see it. So when you turn that back through now, you're actually attached at the bottom there. So you don't need to do anything at the end. Okay, so let's do the other side of our lining. So back to our position again. I'm going to fold that bit of the outer back before we start this time, so it's a bit easier. Easier for you to see, hopefully. So we're going to draw up the leg of the lining to meet the arms of the lining. Right sides together and clip them in place. I know it looks a bit fiddly, this. It's not bad when you're doing it. It's trying to get you to see it on camera. So we've got that zip channel still visible in the lining. You can see that there. The raw edges are folded back, and we're going to stitch across there again with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'll just put an extra clip in the sides to hold the sides in place. Ooh. Try another. There we go. Right, I'll stitch that. There we go. And then we're going to do the same thing again and stitch all 4 arms and legs together on that side, just to seal that bottom zip point. So make sure it's all nice and flat. Everything on top of each other now. And just a couple of stitches just over where the zip teeth are. So I'll flip it to the other side to do it. There we go, that when you turn it through is sealed inside against there. Okay, so that's the arms and legs of our lining done too. Well done. Now you can trim your excess zip tape. As I say, you could have done it earlier, but I like to keep it on just in case. I have no idea what just in case is, but just in case. There we go. Make sure your zip is still open halfway in there, because that's important. We need that. We need to be able to turn it through at the end. And we're ready now to box our corners. I've just angled the camera up a bit so you can see this operation a little bit clearer. Now, I know they don't look like it, but these are just huge box corners like you'd see in a men's wash bag or a dot bag. So we need to close them up. So there's 4 on the body and there's 4 on the lining. We'll do all 4 separately. So with the bag inside out still and the lining sitting separately towards the top, just turn that around so you can see that the lining's up here. So we'll pull it into its final box shape. So you can see this line here is our seam line. So where we have the strap carriers, they're kind of sat in the middle. So can you see the 4 box corners there? So let's start clipping those together. So we'll do one first. So pull them together. That seam there is going towards the bottom. And match so they fall in line and clip them in place. So that's our first one. So let's turn it round. Second one, you can see there's our strap carrier kind of in the middle. Our lining's way up here, away. We're only joining outer to outer. And flatten that out. That seam goes towards the bottom of the bag, the seam allowances. Make sure it all falls nicely in line. Flatten it out and clip it. Let's do the same on the reverse. Turn it over. Line it out the way. Flatten those seams. There's another breakage. Not doing very well today. Clip those in place. And there's all 4 box corners clipped. So we're keeping the lining out of the way. We're going to stitch these each 4 with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to keep the lining well out of the way, and if you stitch from this side you can see where the lining is all the time rather than stitching from the larger side. Much easier to watch what you're doing and do it from that side. Now the tendency is, I've noticed myself when you're on the machine, you tend to sew a narrower seam allowance when you get up to this end because the zip is kind of pushing you away. So you need to make sure it's 1 centimetre all the way up, because that will change the width of your bag sides if you alter the seam allowance. And it's worth drawing it on, no problem drawing it on. Also, if you're using a walking foot, I would change it out now because there isn't room to get a walking foot in the width of there. So either use a narrow machine foot or even a zipper foot, and then you're not being pushed away on that side. It's really important to backstitch at the beginning and end of each of these seams, because that is what is going to form the corner of the bag when you turn it through. So if you don't stitch all the way to the end, you're going to have a little rumple, a little bump at the end. So yeah, stitch all the way to the end and make sure you backstitch over it. So let's take this to the machine and I'm going to stitch the first seam. So I'm just trying to angle the camera so you can see me stitching this a bit better. So let's sew our first seam. So open it up. So we're going to stitch from the zip side so you know you can see that your lining is completely out of the way. Starts at the bottom here. And my 1 centimetre seam allowance with my narrow gauge foot. Go off the seam at the bottom and backstitch back on. When you get to the top end, it's trying to push you away a little bit. That's why you need the narrow foot. So that's our first seam stitched. So you can see here, that's quite a narrow allowance or a margin there. So that's why you need the narrow foot, because you don't want to be pushed away and make that seam narrower at the top, because that would make, if you made all 4 seams narrower at the top than the bottom, the bag would end up wider at the top than it was at the bottom and look strange. So let's move on to the next one. Lining well out of the way. Even pull the zipper out of the way to give yourself a bit more space. Second one. Let's do the next. And the final one. From the top, hold the lining back. So that's all 4 box corners done on the outer, and now it's time to do the lining. So we're going to stitch the lining seams in exactly the same way, but we can't do all 4 at once. We can't clip all 4 at once here because they are attached now at this little section, and I'll call this section the strap connector section so we can identify it afterwards. So let's do one at once. If you just look up from there, you'll see that corner, and that is the end of the seam. So pull that open, or pull it closed together. So let me clip that in place and I'll just show you how to identify that a bit better. So that was where the strap connector joins there at the end of the zip. That is falling in the middle, or about a third of the way down, of that long seam. It's not on the edge, but if you open up those lining corners and fold them together or pull them together, you'll see how it falls. That seam needs to go towards the bottom of the bag, so it needs to fall towards the longer end of the seam. And can you see how that's folding? So we can take that to the machine now and stitch that in place. So again, I'm going to stitch it from that side so we can see what we're doing, and we can be pushing the bag out the way, and we can be making sure that we're not catching the outer in it anywhere. 1 centimetre seam allowance again. You have to fold the bag down and hold it out of the way a little bit once you get to the centre. It is a bit trickier on these lining seams, but you can do it. Back stitch at the beginning of the end of each one again. There's your first seam, and on the back, I've caught that in. So let's do another. So turn it over where you can see the other one open, and bear in mind that section there is going to fall in the middle of the seam. So just pull it open where you see those corners, pull that together. Pull it open until they fall on top of each other. Yeah, nice and flat. Clip that in place. And actually you could use pins here because it wants to pull apart. So actually pins could be a better option. And again, I'll stitch that with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, but I'll stitch it from the side where we have the outer, so we can make sure we're not catching anything in there. So we kind of have to wrestle it around as we go. So there's our second one. So for the other two, you kind of have to just push that lining over the top again to reveal the other two sides, the open ones. And here we go. So checking on that corner again. So stitching from the top again, from the side, so you can see that outer. Yeah, that's it, and then we have to find the last one. Where's my last open one? There it is. Turn that bag over a little bit. There's my middle. There's my ends, so just pull that apart. Obviously I'm making cork, so it is quite a tough fabric. It wants to fight me back. If you're using quilting cottons, it's a lot softer. And now I'm going to stitch that last side from the top, keeping the outer out of the way. There we go, that's all 4 box corners of the lining done now too. You may need a bit of chocolate now to recover. In fact, get yourself a cup of tea. We're ready to turn it through. Now you can trim your seams a little bit. You can trim the corners off if you're using cork or a heavier weight fabric. Your lining should be fine as it is. Be careful doing your top corners because you don't want to catch any lining in there. You have to flip that lining over again to get at the other corners. And let's turn it through. I hope you left that zip open. So it's easier to push up from the bottom, I find. And squeeze it in that way. Here she comes. So take a few moments to turn it out nicely. Get your hand right in there. Poke your corners out. Just use your fingers. You don't really need anything else here. Get into those top corners as well. And there we go. We can see our bag forming. So I'm going to take this to the ironing board. I'm going to give it a good press. But she's looking great. So I've pressed my bag. Obviously not a lot of pressing to be done on cork, but if you're making in cotton, you can press the whole thing. Just a tip there, I find an A5 notebook is great for just slipping inside to help you iron that. You could also just put a folded up piece of fabric or a towel in it. So let's close the lining. Put your hand inside and grab the lining out, and hopefully you'll have a lovely folded edge in there already from where we folded it and pressed it earlier. So all we're going to do is line those up together, across the seam and clip in place. So we'll just close that with a straight stitch about 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Go trim up. Obviously I've been using a contrast thread all the way through here so you can see it better. You can use a tonal or a matching thread when you make your bag. Let's tuck that back in. And there we go, we're now ready to apply our strap. Oh, and just before I forget, if you didn't do the fiddly bit to attach your lining inside to the bottom of the zipper, you can just get a little needle and thread in now and stitch. Just get a quick slip stitch along that bottom edge and that'll secure it. So, onto our strap. So just before we make the strap, I'll just show you a quick way. Particularly if you're using cork or something, I always find I haven't got enough to make a full length of strap, so I often end up joining it. But this works for fabric or cork or vinyl, whatever. It's just a little bit stronger than joining 2 pieces in a straight line because it kind of spreads the load a little bit. So we join them like you would almost a piece of bias tape when you're making bias binding. So we're going to join it crossways. So if you lay the 2 pieces of strap at right angles and draw a line from corner to corner, if you just have them overlapping a tiny bit, and then you'll get a nice diagonal if you draw from corner to corner there. I don't know if you can see that. So we're going to draw from this corner to that corner, and then stitch across that line. You'll get a nice diagonal join. So when you open that up, you've got a nice strip, but whether you're using that as a 2-fold method strap or a single fold method strap, that will give you a good, that'll sort of spread the load and increases the strength because you're across two sides, spreading it across two sides at different angles. So I'll trim that back, and then I'm going to fold these back, and I'm going to stitch the seam allowances down. So I'll do it from the reverse because it's easier to see your seam allowances. So that just keeps those down flat inside once you turn it over. So we'll trim that up, but you can see it gives a nice effect on the outside. So once that's folded, it gives a nice tidy join to your strap. So I'll do my second side. Just trim the sides down. If you've got any seam allowances sticking out. And then we're ready to make our strap. So to make our strap, you've got two different measurements. You've got one for fabric or vinyl and one for cork. So if you're making in fabric, I'll show you the cork in a moment, but if you're making in fabric, you'll find it's twice as wide because we're going to fold it in to conceal all the raw edges. So this will be your interface strap, obviously a lot longer. Folded it in half along the width and press to give you a nice long line. Open it up again and fold the sides in to meet the middle, and then fold back over itself so you've concealed all the raw edges inside. So that's the basis if you're using the fabric or vinyl. And then we'll top stitch the edges down both sides, just about 3mm, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now, if you're using cork, as I am today, I'll show you how to do that. I'll demonstrate on the cork. So I'm just going to fold that in half once, because obviously the edges of cork don't fray, so I can leave that raw as such. So I'm going to start clipping directly one edge on top of the other, wrong sides together. So match those edges really neatly, because obviously you're going to see those. I have started clipping at the other edge already because this is a long old strap. I've run out of clips there. Okay, so we're going to take this to the machine, and I'm going to stitch 3mm or 1/8 of an inch away from the edge on both sides. Always very satisfying, that bit. So whichever method you're using will pick up here. So whether it's fabric or it's cork, that's fine. So we're going to thread our adjuster buckle onto the strap. So there's my 3/4 inch adjuster buckle. I'm just going to thread that over the bar in the centre and fold it back on itself. So I've got about 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches of strap on the other side. Clip that in place, and then I'm going to stitch over close to the bar, as close as I can get to the bar. Now again, you can use your zipper foot or your hump jumper, whichever is easier for you. So you can either do 2 lines of stitching one at the end there and one close to the bar, or you can do one line of stitching and a rivet, which is what I'm going to do today. And then I'm going to attach a rivet to the end here. So you can do 2 lines of stitching if you prefer. So let me grab a pen and I'm just going to mark a dot in the middle there where I want my rivet. Punch a hole. Grab my rivet. I have got an extra video on using rivets on the YouTube channel. If you are not familiar with using them, pop the back on and then straight. Oh, I didn't put that on very straight, did I? Should have done it from the other side. Right, never mind. So I've got my rivet machine. Quick press. I'm trying to do things too quickly. But there we go, we've got our rivet in place. I shall be a bit more careful with the other side. So grab your bag, let's put our strap on. So I'm going to first of all thread the loose end of my strap, not the buckle end, but the loose end of the strap, through from the top of the rectangle ring on one side, pull it through. Make sure that that raw edge of your strap is facing outwards away from the bag. And then grab your loose end again. Thread that through one side of your adjuster buckle. Pull it right the way through. And can you see how that's going to be enclosed inside there? And then back through the other side, over the top of the adjuster bar. Back through the other side. There we go, so that's one side attached. So you can see that'll be enclosed in there. So you don't see that join at all. And then from the other side, we're going to move to the other side of the bag. And from the outside of the rectangle ring, push it inwards towards the bag. Fold it back by 1.5 inches again, or 4 centimetres, and that's where we're going to join that. So I'll just clip that in place. So we'll do the same thing again, either 1 line of stitching and a rivet, or 2 lines of stitching and a rivet. So I'll just do 1 line and then rivet the other one. So there's 1 line of stitching. So I'm going to draw a dot and I'll make sure it's a little bit more central this time. So about there. I'll do it from the front this time so I can see where it's going. I'm not sure if that was the clips or my knuckles cracking then. There we go. So grab a rivet. There we go, that's my straps riveted on, or stitched on. Beautiful! Now you can make that bag with a detachable strap as well, so all you'd need to do is exchange the rectangle rings for D rings, and then you can use a detachable strap on there. And again, I've got a detachable strap video tutorial on YouTube as well, if you want to look at that. I'll put the link in below. And our final operation is to add our Pixie zip pullers. So this is our final little flourish. Cut out your pieces K, which are your Pixie zip pullers. Now they're a bit fiddly to cut out, I know, because they're so small. And I had a fantastic tip from one of my Facebook board members, was to just stick them on with a bit of sticky tape, because you're going to be cutting all the way around it. So that tape will come off with a pattern piece. These zip pullers do need to be in a non-fraying fabric, so either cork or leather or something similar. Here we go, to see that just comes off. Absolutely brilliant method. So I'm going to punch those ready to accept my rivet. So let's just find the center point, fold it over on itself, line it up, grab my bag. So I've got two to do here, one to the back zip and one to the top zip. So I'm just going to thread that through the hole on my zip puller, grab my rivet, through the hole, clip to the back and through the rivet press. They're so sweet, these really do make a big difference to the bag, especially that back one. And now for the top one, fold in half again, my other one, punch. You can use the punch tool on your rivet machine as well, of course. Just, I'm lazy, I don't like to keep changing it out all the time. And then through the zip on the top of the bag, just zip it round there, through the puller, fold it back on itself, rivet through. And there we are, there's a top pixie zip puller done. They're so cute. And there you go. There's your pixie finished, ready for her first outing. I really hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial and that you've made a bag that you absolutely adore. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're on here. Lots of free content all the time. And do sign up to the Facebook board and show me what you've made. I'd love to see it. Please do make in lots of different fabrics. Make for all your friends and partners. There's loads of different options. Just enjoy. Go sew.